Is this gap down well below the Bollinger Band signed for the Australian share market? Let us be warned. There is no point in us trying to convince ourselves that we're floating in money. We have to be realistic to work out which direction we're heading. On the 14th of May 2014, my projection, which I sent to Michael McCormack, our federal member, a couple of times, showed that there was no chance of a balanced budget in 2016, which was different to what Tony Abbott, Joe Hockey, Michael McCormack and others were projecting. On YouTube there are many people named Brian Mills, but only one who has this picture as his inspiration, and only one who has his photograph with oranges. Go to there on YouTube and subscribe. Later on you can unsubscribe, but there's a lot of amateurish film, but there's very much a lot of inspiration and logical thoughts. When I was given a DVD by the late Lant Dennisby, I immediately realised the brilliance of the engineer, economist and patriot. This is a copy of his diagram showing how the developed countries that they would grow at a great rate forever. In 1970 they decided to help developing countries by lowering tariffs. In 1975 the Lima Declaration called for a 25-year experiment to allow the developing countries to build up to 23% of the world's production. The unintended consequence was that the developed countries experienced a reduction in GDP as shown. This is a growth rate of GDP. There was no review in the year 2000. Lance could see what was happening and projected in 1996 that Europe would collapse first, and they are doing that now with Greece expected to default soon. He said the United States would go next. They are being saved, or else their demise is being delayed by paper money, and the current status of the US is holding as long as the US dollar is the world's reserve currency. In 1996, Lance Endesby said that Australia would not have to follow the other developed countries down if our manufacturing and agriculture remained strong. Both of them have tanked. The mining boom helped, but now we are on a downward trajectory which can only be corrected by constructive political action. These are Australian Bureau of Statistics figures that come out every quarter, and this is quarter by quarter, and as soon as the next one comes along, we lose the influence of the last of the mining boom. We are now well below the 3% which is required if we want to stay out of debt. So we are headed on a very bad direction with no revenue coming up. We have to get at our politicians as quickly as possible. Share markets around the world have gone up, and in fact there is a certain rate at which they go up which is normal. The American share market has been hitting all-time highs. Unfortunately, I think that historians are going to be showing these movements for hundreds of years into the future. I am one in about 10,000 or more in a group who can claim to have been alive at the early part of what is known as the 1929 Big Depression. I knew nothing about it until about 1937, and then I started to understand what was happening in Griffith, and then later to learn something of the patterns of such events. It seems that a big one comes out about every 100 years or so. My understanding is that share markets go up too high, past the normal, as in AB. Crash to BC, retrace 60% CD. I saw this happen this time and watched it with great interest. Then an amazing thing happened. At this decision point, economists around the world decided they would not let history repeat itself. The answer was for the US to print lots of paper money, Q1, then more, Q2, and so on. If the only measuring stick was share market apparent values, it worked. Europe joined in and produced lots of paper money, so did Japan. The normal secondary crash, DE, eliminates all of the remaining toxic elements, allowing a constructive return to normal, EF. Now that's the pattern that's taken place for each recession, depression until now. The current situation, DG, is taking the American share market, as mentioned before, to all-time highs. During this time, our share market got close to its high, but GDP growth drooped. The increase in share market figures were not backed by fundamentals. There is another measuring stick which is frighteningly real, GDP growth rate. The drop in our GDP growth was down, but gradual, being helped during the once-in-a-lifetime mining boom. Now it is below 3% per annum, which Joe Hockey correctly says is a requirement. As long as we are below 3%, our debt will increase. My policies in the state election and now for the federal election are for revenue like selective tariffs, fixed dollar, return irrigation water to farmers, etc. Even when the correction comes, all of the economists in the world will be fighting tooth and nail to keep their dream alive, so we'll see a sawtooth dropping down to L. Only then will the long L to M live in the memories of those who will have to have had this thrust upon them by politicians and illogical economists. Even my memories of 1937-38 recall people having difficulty getting back to normal. We are in for tough times, but my hope is that it will jolt us into understanding the reality that having the same two major political parties for 114 years has helped us bring on this drastic change, especially in country regions. My hope is that as early as 2006 there will be emerging production-based parties showing the way. For me, the biggest news is that the newly forming Country Party has this as a policy. Government has a responsibility to intervene when free markets fail. I'm sure that Lance Endersby would have welcomed that policy. If Australia did not have such delusions of grandeur and not striven to be accepted as a developed country, we might have become a part of what I claim would have been a very successful BRICS bloc. That is Brazil, Russia, India, China, Australia and South Africa. During the G20 summit in Brisbane last year, Joe Hockey led the C20 leaders to sign a document promising to increase GDP by 2% before the next meeting. Our diagram shows that we were really dropping in production, but we had all these talking heads showing that we were just going up and up. We were heading for a fiscal cliff. A few months after Joe had got the G20 leaders to promise that they would all increase GDP by 2% before the next meeting, a few months later, the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, Christine Lagarde, rained on Joe's parade by announced a drop of 0.5% of GDP for G20. Australia, we have to get our politicians and our economists to smarten up. We have to engage them in debate as often as is possible And even when it's almost impossible, we still have to keep hammering them.